GPU prices continue to crash and AMD launches new CPUs. Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. We have so many great questions for this month's Q&A. We've got questions about new AMD Ryzen CPUs. I can't wait to dive into that. And of course, the GPU market. Prices continue to fall. Should you buy now or should you wait? We've also got great questions about monitors, about memory, and more. Remember, if you get value out of the video, give it a like. It makes a big difference, especially this guy right here. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. With that, let's jump into it. Before that, this video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows 10 licenses and that terrible Activate Windows 10 watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key, and get a Windows 10 Home or Pro OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 25% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom, you have a fully licensed Windows 10 for a crazy low price, which can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. Use the links in the video description below. Let's start off with the big announcement. Of course, AMD is releasing a whole slew of new CPUs. And Zenius asks, what are my thoughts on AMD in particular releasing the lower end Ryzen 5000 CPUs? That's the 5500, the 5600, 5700X. Pricing, how is it going to compete with Alder Lake? Let's stay there for the moment, and then we'll get to the 4000 CPUs and of course the 5800X 3D. So in terms of the lower end CPUs, it's about freaking time. That's all I have to say about it. It's about time. AMD should have released these CPUs over a year ago, at least a year ago. It doesn't make any sense that we've been stuck with a 5600X at an MSRP of $300. Now, of course, you can buy it for $225 to $230 right now at retail, so the MSRP is kind of irrelevant. But for a long time, it did sell for that $300 price point, and that was the best you could do. Now, it was a great gaming CPU, don't get me wrong, and one of the great things about the Ryzen 5000 lineup overall has been that you could buy the CPU at the bottom of the stack, which is 5600X, and get almost the same gaming performance even out of a very high tier GPU that you would with like the Ryzen 5950X. In previous generations, for instance, if you bought a CPU at the bottom of the the 9th gen Intel series, then you were going to get significantly decreased performance. So the great thing about Ryzen 5000 is we got rid of that distinction. You're now able to buy something kind of at the low end of the tier and still get amazing gaming performance. And of course, you can go up if you want to chase very small performance gains, or if you're doing it for productivity or kind of other workload reasons. But for gaming, 5600X has been where it's at. I feel like the 5600 non-X is going to become the new gaming go-to. Now, that being said, we'll see. Alder Lake is very, very, very competitive, and I'm eager to see, yes, it's only a small frequency decrease on the 5600, and of course you're going to be able to overclock the 5600. You cannot overclock the 12400. So there's always going to be that. Can you tune up the 5600 easily, maybe with Precision Boost Overdrive or some easy manual overclocking settings to get it to outperform the 12400 like you can with the 5600X? Because the 5600X is about 5% faster with a super high-end GPU. Again, as I said in my recent best i5 12400 build, you will not see a difference between either CPU at any other GPU level other than the ultra high end. That being said, we have GPUs coming down the pike that are supposedly going to be twice the performance of the current ones now. And I'm talking about the Lovelace NVIDIA RTX 4000 and of course RDNA 3, right? We've got RX 7000 series of GPUs. Those are going to be hugely performant. And are we going to see a difference between the 12400 and the 5600X? And if so, are we going to see a difference between the 5600 and the 12400? That all remains to be seen. So I do love that they're releasing these parts, and I have a feeling we're going to be talking about in just a couple of weeks when we get these parts, that the 5600 non-X is the place to be, that Intel is going to have to further reduce its prices on Alder Lake in order to remain competitive, and they're really going to have to fix those awful B660 motherboards. Very, very disappointing crop of motherboards. I'm kind of shocked. High VRM temperatures, we're seeing them not run the 12400 at the proper frequency. We're seeing some boards outperform others. It should be the other way around. It's just an absolute mess, and it's something that Intel and the board partners really need to get straightened out. Hey, it's a strong argument in favor of building a Ryzen system right now. Those motherboards run rock solid. They've been out for 2 years. All the VRMs on them are perfectly capable of propelling those CPUs to huge heights. And overall, I just think the value argument is swinging heavily back in favor of AMD with these new CPU launches. That being said, we got to wait to see for the performance. In terms of the 5700X, I think it's a CPU that's just kind of lost in space a little bit. What does it have? It's basically a cheaper version of the 5800X. I still think that if you are into productivity, you're still looking at the i5 12600K or the i7 12700 as a go-to right now. And I think that's a problem for AMD, especially the i5 12600K. If you do any video editing, the inclusion of the iGPU makes a big difference in terms of video rendering workloads. That's something that you're not going to have with the 5700X. Remember, it doesn't have integrated graphics on it. And the processing power might punch about the same weight as the i5 12600K, but the loss of that extra video encoding, especially right now when you can get the i5 12600K for about $270, I don't really know where the 5700X fits in. And frankly, that's a CPU that needs to come in my personal opinion, about $250 to really have a place in the market. Let's bring in the cache question as well. Cache massively affects gaming when we're talking about rendering huge amounts of frames. So when we're playing at 1080p with very, very high-end graphics cards, think 3080, 6800 XT, 6900 XT, those kinds of graphics cards, and we're trying to render huge amounts of frames, the cache becomes very, very important in order to keep rendering at a super high level as you're playing games. Now, listen, if you're playing CSGO and you're trying to get 500 frames versus 700 frames, there aren't even monitors that will display that out there. And yes, while there is some advantage to additional FPS beyond the refresh rate for high-end shooters, it's really not, there's not going to be any difference between 500 FPS and 700 FPS in reality. Overall though, when I look at the cache, for instance, the Ryzen 5500 is a CPU that I don't quite understand why we're selling it for $159. To me, that's like a $120 CPU. It's basically a 5600G without the G. Just cut the G off. You don't have the integrated graphics anymore, and it's the same CPU. Well, the problem with the 5600G is, as we saw, that cache does make a difference. It's about anywhere from 10 to 15% slower than a Ryzen 5600X, which has almost double the amount of gaming cache on it, well, L3 cache that is. So I think that these CPU introductions are interesting. I think that I would expect to see further price reductions, especially if the i3 12100 finds its way back into stock. Let's talk briefly about the 5800X 3D. I think that's the super interesting CPU that's coming out if you are into high-end gaming and you don't want to wait for the 7000 series or Raptor Lake, the 13th gen Intel coming down the pike. 5800X 3D, we're looking at about 15%. This is AMD's numbers right now. We'll of course verify this when it comes out on the 20th. 15% gaming at 1080p with a super high-end GPU. To me, the value of the 5800X 3D is not necessarily somebody who wants to build a system right now. That's a good value, don't get me wrong. The best value for that CPU is if you're somebody with a Ryzen 1600 and a 300 series motherboard or 400 series motherboard, maybe you've got a Ryzen 2600 system, maybe you've got a Ryzen 3600, and you're like, wouldn't it be awesome if I could take this PC and spend $300, $400, $500 and make it into a brand new PC top of the line again? That's really interesting. I think that if you are somebody who built a Ryzen 3600 and you're looking at it now and you'd love to upgrade the graphics card, but if you do, you're losing a lot of performance because the new CPUs run so much faster, that 5800X 3D becomes very, very attractive. Listen, for $450, if you could do that rather than building a brand new gaming PC, that might make a lot of sense. Let's just briefly go over the Ryzen 4000 CPUs. I'm kind of already calling this is AMD's garage sale, where they're just like, what garbage do we have in the back that we want to clear out of inventory before the 7000 series comes out? And I think that's where we're going to see like the Ryzen 4100, the Ryzen 4500, and the 4600G. Problem with these are they're Zen 2 Renoir. That means these were APUs that just didn't cut the mustard and you had to downbin them. And this is what you get when you downbin them and you disable cores and you disable the graphics on them. We're getting CPUs with an unimpressive amount of cache. We're getting CPUs with an unimpressive base and boost clock overall. I just don't see the value of these versus something like the 12100. So in the absence of a 12100 out there, yes, these might make some sense. Although the 10400 is still out there, the 11400 is still out there. Do these beat the 10400 and 11400? Probably not if you use a B560 motherboard. I'm open to being wrong once the performance numbers come out. I'm not holding out a lot of hope for these CPUs whatsoever. And if you're interested in lower levels, I'd look at least the Ryzen 5500. Let's jump into questions about the graphics card market. And we've got great ones from Yi, from Pickle Burrito, A2ZMC, Matthew Tetley, and Skurdis. And they're all asking essentially very similar questions. The first big one really is whether or not to build something now, buy a graphics card now, a 3000 or 6000 series card, right? NVIDIA 3000 series or AMD 6000 series card, or should you just go ahead and wait either for Intel's new GPUs coming or even further down the pike for NVIDIA's RTX 4000 series that are supposed to be coming by the end of the year, as well as AMD's Radeon RX 7000 series cards? Well, it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're somebody who normally buys a super high-end GPU like an RTX 3090, a 6900 XT, that level of graphic card, the chances are you probably already have something that's pretty good and you're going to be able to make it just fine to the end of the year. Go ahead and wait until the brand new cards are coming out because the performance is rumored to be about double what we're seeing right now. That being said, if the performance is only 50% more than what we're seeing now, that's still worth waiting for in my book. You will have to fight through probably the whole scalper thing again, probably shortage. Even if they announce and release these cards by the end of the year, you may not be able to get one for a couple of months. So just bake all that in right now if you're thinking about waiting for the 4000 and 7000 series cards. For other folks who are looking more like the mid-range to the low end, I think, listen, there are two things. If you don't mind buying a used mining GPU, then I would wait probably until June, until Ethereum goes to proof of stake. I go through all this in my recent GPU update. I'll leave a link to it down in the video description. You can listen in more. But I think the summertime is going to be best for those of you who are looking to get the maximum performance and you don't mind buying something used. For those of you who are like, I don't want to buy something used, I want to buy a new graphics card, then right now, honestly, in the next month or so, I expect prices to really start to bottom out. In fact, just today I was looking and there is some GPUs are hitting MSRP through combo deals, and the combo deals are not that bad. And I was like, wow, cards are actually beginning to hit MSRP. It's like, we didn't even believe these times would exist, right? Just a couple months ago, it seemed like this thing was never going to end. But that's what's happened with the crash of Ethereum. And cards are just stacking up on shelves right now because miners aren't buying cards anymore because Ethereum's going to go to proof of stake. That demand is completely cratered. And on the other side of it, miners are starting to sell off some of their cards. Some of the miners are going to mine till Ethereum isn't mineable anymore. That's when you're going to see the big flood is June, July. That being said, if I've been waiting for a year and a half at this point, an RTX 3060 Ti for $650 sounds pretty dang good to me. What is that card really going to come down to? $500? Do I really want to wait 4 more months and save a little bit of money, especially if I'm building a new system? The amount I'm saving there versus the cost of all the other components, which are at their historic lows for memory, for storage, for just about everything except PC cases. Everything else is at their historic lows. You can get a Ryzen 5600X for $225. You can get an i5-12400 for $200. The cost of everything else is so low, those costs may go up while you're waiting, and then you've done the opposite, right? Maybe you'll end up spending more even though you get the graphics card for less to build your system. If you're someone who just wants the graphics card, I would probably hang out for another month or so. So this is, if you're not building a new system, if you're just looking to upgrade, I'd hang out for another month. That's how I would approach it. It really depends on what your particular situation is. I hope that's kind of helpful guidance. Kurdis also asks, I'm building my first streaming and gaming PC. They're going with an i5-12400, but they're confused. Should they get an RTX 3060 or 6600 XT? Because where they are, both are about the same price in India. What is the better pick? Let's take a very quick look at my GPU database. If you follow my monthly GPU update, this will look familiar to you. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and dumped in all the GPUs, both used and new, that I would think you should consider for a gaming build. And this is all the GPUs that AMD and NVIDIA currently support with drivers. For the new ones, if we take a look at, for instance, we said the 6600 XT, what we do is we take a performance value that I grab from Tech Power Up's GPU rankings, and we compare it, and then we dump in the price, and we get a price to performance. Right now, the RX 6600 XT is giving It's 237% performance of an RX 570, and it's doing so for $2.11 per performance. That's a great value. It's number 4 on the overall value chart, as you can see it right here. If we look at the 3060, even with its now reduced price to about $550, actually, I'll be honest, I saw them for $500 earlier today. If you can get one for that price, then it does a little bit better. Let's go ahead and just resort this. And this is the great thing. If you want to use this spreadsheet, I'll leave a link to the video down in the video description. You can put in pricing for your region. I grab spot pricing from eBay, and then I grab new retail pricing. I update this once a month. I'm going to keep doing that as things improve. Again, check out my best graphics card update for more. But as we can see, RTX 3060 ends up right here. Number 12 on the list, not terrible. $2.37 per percent of performance, basically. And we can see that you can get it for about the same price, right? $500. So right now, the 3060 overall only giving 211% of an RX 570 versus the 6600 XT, which has a higher score. I would get the 6600 XT for that reason, unless you, for some reason, just absolutely have to have something related to NVIDIA DLSS or some other reason. I just think the 6600 XT is simply the better performance at that price. Again, though, check out this spreadsheet for more down in the video description. We continue to get tons of questions about the 5600G and 5700G. Funkadelic Peach wants to know, they got to choose between a 5700G and a 5600X at $220. Which one should they be getting? ABC Play 57 says, is it justifiable to continue to build a 5700G rig and wait for GPU prices, or just build something now? I think with GPU prices coming into alignment right now in terms of a normalized market, I think the 5600G and 5700G will continue to make less and less sense. And it'll start to make more and more sense to build a gaming PC right now with an actual graphics card using either the i5-12400 as your CPU base or the Ryzen 5 5600 or 5600X, because they just give you much more performance than the 5600G is going to once you put a dedicated graphics card in the 5600G. In our testing with a RTX 3060 Ti, we found it loses about 10% performance. If you're going to already buy the graphics card right then, why do you also want to get a CPU that's going to lose 10% performance on your graphics card? You'll spend like 10, 15 bucks more and you'll just get the 5600X instead. That's just going to make a lot more sense. That being said, if you feel like we're not there yet, or you want to be one of these folks who waits till Ethereum goes to proof of stake and there's a large kind of slug of used mining graphics cards that come in out there, yeah, by all means, you can continue to build those systems. I'm not discouraging you from doing it. I'm just saying that their time is drawing to an end right now, and I expect those CPUs to reduce even further in price as we get more and more regular graphics card market, because those systems will go back to what the 3200G and the 3400G were, which are CPUs that you're going to build just super ultra budget gaming rigs with that you probably never put a graphics card in, or maybe you will, a couple of years from then. So that's how I see the 5600G and 5700G right now becoming less and less relevant, but still has its time in the sun. Then we got a whole bunch of questions for people who have built 5600G gaming PCs out there, and they're seeing the graphics card market get better, and they're wondering, hey, what's the GPU I should get? Harry Young asked this, Macy asked this, from Tyler and Scarlett, in terms of, well, once I get a GPU, what about the onboard graphics? Is that still doing me any favors? So let's go through those really quickly. In terms of the GPU that you should be getting right now, I would take a look at the RX 6600 if you were originally planning to play in 1080p. That would be a really great graphics card. Prices on those are significantly declining. I might wait another month to see if they come down maybe another $100 even and actually hit their MSRP. RTX 3060 Ti I think would be a really good level graphics card for a 5600G or 5700G that you've already built, and those cards are now $650-ish. I expect those cards to continue to come down again over the course of the next month. Pretty rapid decreases. How do you switch from the integrated graphics to a dedicated graphics card? It's super simple. You just plug in the dedicated graphics card, and then you move your video output from the motherboard slot and you move it into the graphics card. Now you're getting your video out on that. Can you use that onboard integrated graphics to do anything for you? Yeah, you could use it to run a second monitor if you wanted, or a second or even third monitor on there, to doing something else. But you're not going to want to use those monitors for gaming. You're not going to use that as your gaming display. But if you want to watch like Netflix or something as you're playing your game, you can easily do that. Just make sure whatever gaming monitor that you're actually using for gaming is plugged into your graphics card. I'll have to check into this a little more deeply, but I think on a lot of rendering applications, you can potentially use the 5600G APU to help render frames. I don't think in the same way that Intel QuickSync does it with like the i5-12400, for instance, with the onboard graphics there. I don't think it's as good, and it may not even work that well. I'll have to double check and dig into that deeper. But I think when you get a graphics card for the 5600G, the integrated Radeon graphics, they're just kind of done. Unless you want to run a second monitor with them that, like a web browser or something like that, you're just kind of done with it. All right, more GPU questions. What else, right? Delta Mike, William Howard. How should you pair as your CPU and your GPU? Do you need an Intel GPU with an Intel CPU, an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU? Let's quickly go through that. The big difference here is what we call smart access memory or resizable bar. And that was a feature that AMD came out with when they launched the RX 6000 series of GPUs, and NVIDIA quickly countered because this is just basically it resizes the memory bandwidth. That's one way to think about it without going too deep into the details, because you just want to know which one to get. You don't necessarily want to know how to design them. I would say right now, do you have to pair one with the other? No, but if I was getting a AMD GPU, I would be pairing it with an AMD CPU, because I believe over time AMD will continue to have performance enhancements to smart access memory that will benefit AMD CPU and GPU combos more than the other way around. All right, Andre asks, what's the difference between AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards, and why do people prefer one over the other? Well, the first answer to that question is some people, there's Mindshare. And I've done polling on this of the audience. Some people will absolutely only buy a graphics card. This is primarily an NVIDIA thing. I think that's about 30% last time I polled. Will only consider graphics cards from NVIDIA. To me, that's the power of marketing. That's a perfectly valid choice. It's their money. They can go out and buy whatever they want. Maybe they had a bad experience with an AMD graphics card 6-7 years ago. Often when I hear about these driver issues, it's like, 6, 7. 10 years ago, I had an AMD graphics card and I had driver problems. So I'm never going to do that again. Well, I've had driver problems with NVIDIA graphics cards. I've also had them with AMD cards, just in fairness. Let's talk about the actual differences, though. In terms of rasterization performance, that's one guard versus the other, and just producing a native image, no difference whatsoever. Both of them are perfectly capable. Used to be the AMD did not compete at the high end. AMD now competes very competently at the high end of rasterization performance. In fact, outperforming NVIDIA at 1080p for sure, and maybe even very slightly at 1440p, with NVIDIA having a very slight edge at 4K. And when I say very slight, I mean these are very slight. The other thing that people will look at is the features on the card. So NVIDIA has their NVENC encoder, which AMD's encoder used to be really bad. It's no longer bad anymore. It's actually quite good. But NVENC is probably superior for professional reasons. That being said, if I was just a gamer, NVENC is not a big selling point for me anymore if I know that AMD's encoders come up to snuff. And if I want to stream my gameplay or anything like that, I'm going to be able to do it with the same, just about the same visual clarity, and no one's going to be able to tell. But DLSS, which is the upscaling technology on NVIDIA's cards, which uses actual hardware on the graphics card in order to do that, it's quite impressive. That being said, it's not in all titles. AMD is about to release RSR, which is going to be an upscaling software solution for its graphics cards in Radeon Adrenaline's driver in order to upscale all games. So it might be that we see that the AMD cards come up with a huge advantage on that. That should be any day now. So we'll have to see what that comes out at. Ray tracing still is NVIDIA or bust. AMD's ray tracing, unless you're going to do it with the 6900 XT, just not good enough in terms of performance for me. Frankly, on the NVIDIA side, just between us, not good enough either. I just don't think the current crop of graphics cards has the level of performance in order to justify getting an NVIDIA one versus getting an AMD one. The next generation might, although AMD is going to be much better in that regard as well. So those are some of the major differences. To me, not enough of a feature set difference between NVIDIA and AMD unless you do professional workloads like video editing, where I'm really going to have NVIDIA. I would buy either one. Antonio asks, for those who want to wait for AM5 and Ryzen 7000, what's going to go on with DDR5 pricing? I actually think you're really smart to bring this up, Antonio, because I'm really worried about it. Now listen, DDR5 right now is not where it was when Alder Lake launched in November of 2021, where you couldn't buy it no matter how much you wanted to spend on it because it was just completely out of stock. And if you could find it, it was like thousands of dollars for a 16 gigabyte kit. It was crazy, right? That being said, right now the pricing is still high. It's $300 or more for a 32 gigabyte kit of like 5200 speed memory. Now here's the question I have. Is it that the DDR5 market is better now only because we did all this testing with Alder Lake and found that DDR4 actually works just as well as DDR5, if not better on some applications, and it didn't make any sense to buy DDR5, so nobody's buying DDR5 for Alder Lake, and they're only buying DDR4, and that's why the market's recovered? In that case, that's not really a recovery to me. And it's not something that if I were AMD, I'd want to bank on launching Ryzen 7000. So that's something for them really to think about. If I were them, I'd be putting all the pressure on the memory makers to generate stockpiles of that stuff, because I think Ryzen 7000 is going to be very, very popular as long as we can actually build it. AMD's got to really keep this in the forefront. I don't know what's going to happen with it. I don't think anyone knows. And if I were AMD, I'd be worried. Sean Whalen asked a hugely upvoted question. What would be the best type and size of monitor to use for both gaming and productivity work, and what specs should they pay attention to when choosing? This is a challenge, right? There's a lot of ways in which both gaming and productivity can come together, but gaming and productivity also can diverge when you're trying to choose a monitor. Let's talk about why. Well, first, of course, if you haven't checked out my best gaming monitor 2022 guide, I'll leave a link to that down in the video description. I go into more depth about what you're looking for a gaming monitor. I don't, however, talk much about productivity because it's gaming monitor focused. So gaming monitors, we want higher refresh rate, we want lower latency. We are willing to look at things like curved VA panels, which have great contrast to them. On the other hand, in terms of productivity work, especially if you're doing like color grading and things of that nature, you're looking for a larger coverage of the color spectrum. Now, you can get that with a gaming monitor for sure, but you're probably also looking to do it on a flat panel, not a curved panel. So that's going to get rid of a lot of the VA monitors with good contrast out there. You're going to be probably mostly focused on IPS at that point. And in terms of color accuracy and out-of-the-box factory calibration, those are also going to be important things for you. Now, of course, you can calibrate your monitor, but you may have to get some calibration equipment in there if you don't want to just find some settings on the internet and plug them in. So those are things to think about in terms of that space. I would just ask yourself, which is more important? If the productivity is more important because I'm making money for it, I might just get a totally separate monitor for productivity than for gaming. Thank you so much for joining us on this month's Q&A. We had so many great questions. Remember, if you got value, give it a like. It makes a big difference, especially this guy right here. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. And if you want to see an awesome i5 12400 gaming build and you just want to understand what it takes to build one, check out this video right here. We go through the best motherboards, the best memory, the best everything. Check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one.